Welcome to the 9th chapter of the Book of Ezra. At the 8th chapter, I mentioned that I was going to look up a few things, and they were the place Ahava, and I looked them up. Actually, it's interesting because when it mentions in the King James, the Ahava, it gives two different Greek spellings in two different places. One, it's epsilon, iota, and the other is alpha, theta, omicron, epsilon. But either way, I couldn't find anything about it. There's all kinds of suppositions on the internet, Wikipedia. You can go there or do a search and look for Ahava. And then the Casifia was the same, related to this place that nobody really knows exactly where it is. It probably doesn't make any difference, actually. It was along the route that the Jews took to go back to the Holy Land from Babylon, probably up around the Euphrates somewhere. And the other was the Nethanim, who I mentioned that I wasn't sure exactly what they were. Well, they're only mentioned in Ezra and Nehemiah. It really doesn't say what they are. Probably they were some type of peoples that were tied to the service of the temple, as I mentioned. One place mentions how they think they may have been the people of the Gibeonites when Joshua was going into the Holy Land, into Palestine, and the Gibeonites pretended to be coming from far off to make a peace treaty with the Jews, but yet they were real close, and they disguised themselves as somebody had traveled far. And after they made the treaty, then they became known that they were real close. And so Joshua, as a sort of a semi-curse, put them as people that would carry the wood for the sacrifices and different types of menial laborers. And some people think that these Nethanim could be them. If it was, they were not Jewish. The Gibeonites were not Jewish, but that's just a possibility because Josephus later, around the time of Christ, mentions them as temple servants. So that was the Nethanim, and that was all in the last chapter 8. Now, as I mentioned, things do go bad, and in chapter 9, it begins, and as these things were finished, the rulers approached to me, saying, the people of Israel did not separate in the priests and the Levites from the peoples of the lands in their abominations, of the Canaanite, the Hittite, the Perizzite, the Jebusite, the Ammonite, the Moabite, and the Moserite, and the Amorite. All these different peoples of the land, they joined in marriage to these people of different times, and they did the same thing when they went to Babylon, where right here where it says the rulers approached. Now I believe he's talking about Jewish rulers here, because the Samaritans could care less if they were obeying the laws or not, I would think. So it says, continues in that condemnation, for they took, that is the Jews, from their daughters to themselves and to their sons, and the holy seed mixed together among the peoples of the lands. Now, this holy seed mixing together, my father was very anti-Semitic. He did not like Jewish people for whatever reason. It was pretty much the case with a lot of people. In fact, today, a white supremacist or a Nazi, I don't know what he was, but he went into a synagogue in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I believe killed 11 Jews, and yelling and screaming about the Jews, you got to die, and things like that. And so when my dad, the anti-Semitic part of him, he worked with a man, wouldn't you know, the guy would put a Jew right with him in the same job. His name was Bender, and they were both come out of the army, and they went to work for the government in the post office as as they call them federal police, but actually they were just post office guards at the time, elevator operators, the Nephilim, I suppose. And he would talk to me and tell me about why, I'd say, well, why don't you like the Jews? Why do you have such a problem? He says, well, that bender, I asked him, he says, well, why do you have anything against us or whatever? And he said, well, you all stay together. You don't mix with other people. And, well, that's right. They don't. They didn't. Some of them did, though. That was the problem here. But the ones that didn't had it taken out on them by the people who wanted to mix with them, but were shunned for these reasons that the Jews had, that God told them to be this way in the law, to separate from the unclean. But the time of Christ really changed everything. To a person that was Jewish, were not, as I see it, they became, I call them the progeny of the crucifiers, and they perpetuated the falsities of that God did not take a human form in the person of Jesus and so forth for thousands of years. But he did, and so this mixing together of the holy seed, I don't know how holy it is anymore, but we can, as Christians, kind of go along with this same idea in that we're not to be unequally yoked, it says, with unbelievers. Paul mentions that. So if we're going to be married, then we shouldn't join in with an unbeliever. But if the people of the land that were barbarians at the time were having feasts and so forth, Paul mentioned it was okay to go to these feasts and even eat of the food. And so the exceptions of when Christ came and with Christianity, if we did the same thing and only mixed with Christians, then how would other people ever find out about the love of Jesus Christ, which reaches out to every man, Jew, Gentile, every color, black, white, yellow, brown, and to male and female, and so sinners all. And so this is no longer the case, but it was then that they had not seen Jesus yet. So it says, even by the hand of the rulers and of the commandants, in this breach of contract in rule, the intermarrying with the unbeliever, the non-Jews. And as I heard this word, I tore my garments and my undergarment, and was agitated, and plucked the hair of my head and from my beard, and sat down for calming. Wow, he was really upset. I can't imagine pulling my hair out. I've never been that upset. Or to pull my hair out of my beard. And then he sat down for calming. So he was really angry when he heard about this and thought about it. And there gathered to me everyone trembling at the word of the God of Israel concerning the breach of contract of the resettlement. So apparently these people, will find out in the next chapter how much intermarriage there was. But when he heard about it, then they were trembling because they knew this was not of what God wanted. And so they were in rebellion to God if this is what they were still doing, and had to do something about that. And I was sitting calming myself until the evening sacrifice. And during the evening sacrifice, I rose up from my humiliation, and in my tearing my garments and in my undergarments, he was humiliated, probably because he got so upset and doing all these tearing the garments and so forth. Now, the high priest was not to tear his garments, but I'm not sure about a regular priest. But anyway, he did tear them. That I leaned upon my knees and spread forth my hands to the Lord my God. So he's down on his knees with his hands to the air. Oh, and I said, "Oh Lord, I am ashamed and feel shame to raise up, oh my God, my face to you. For our lawlessnesses multiplied over our head, and our trespasses are magnified unto the heaven. From the days of our fathers we are in great trespass until this day. And in our lawless deeds we were delivered up, and our kings and our priests in the hand of the kings of the nations, by broadsword and into captivity, and in seizure, and in shame of our face, as this day. They were taken, of course, by Sennacherib and the northern Assyrian king of Israel, and then Nebuchadnezzar with Judah and Benjamin, taken to Babylon, where they're now leaving. And now, as the Lord our God was lenient a little to us, to leave us for deliverance, and to give to us reliance in the place of his sanctuary, that is to go back, to enlighten our eyes, and to give a little restoration to life in our servitude, for we are bondmen. And in our servitude, the Lord our God did not abandon us, and leaned mercy towards us before the kings of the Persians. They were bondmen to the Persians, and Christians are bondmen to Jesus, to God. And he tells us what to do, and we do them. And I start my day trying to put that into perspective, that I'm a bondman. Everything I have is not mine. Everything that I own is God's. The microphone I'm talking into, the camera's taking the picture, the room, the books behind me, the house that's over my head, the car that sits out in front of my house, and the job that I'm given to go and check to see if people are downloading the Bibles, and if people want to order some, then to pack them up and take them to the post office and mail them out. And I do this day after day, knowing that I'm a bondman of Jesus Christ. Do what he says completely. And these people were the bondmen of the Persian kings, starting with Cyrus on down to Darius, to give us a restoring to life, for them to exalt the house of our God. Now, I think maybe them would be the Persian kings, they exalting the house of God, and to reestablish its deserted places. They sent money and people to go back to Israel, and to give to us a fence in Judah and Jerusalem, a wall in their kingdom, basically. That now, what should we say, O our God, after this? For we abandoned your commandments, which you gave to us by the hand of your bondmen, the prophets, saying, the land into which you enter there to inherit it is a land in motion by the removal of the peoples of the lands of their abominations, which they filled it from mouth to mouth in their uncleannesses. These were idolaters. Israel is going in, is to get rid of all these idolaters, to worship Jehovah, but then instead they married. And now, do not give your daughters to their sons, and from their daughters do not take to your sons, and do not require their peace and their goodwill unto the eon, so as you should grow in strength, and should eat the good of the land, and allot it to your sons unto the eon. Now, that's an interesting thing, because he's telling them not to do it into the eon. Now, the eon, is it talking about forever, or is it the time until Jesus Christ? I believe there are different eons called dispensations. The dispensations of the Jews, I believe, came to an end as far as the law and the things that they are doing. The Holy Spirit went into people that weren't Jews. The temple now resides in the believers. And so the eon that eon, I believe, is ended. And though now the new eon, but I believe another eon will begin when probably, I look and what I see is that the righteous will not suffer God's wrath when he pours it out upon the world. And God will pour his wrath out against the beast and the world. It's all in the book of Revelation. It doesn't mention anything about the church after the first 5 are mentioned. I believe that the Christians will be taken, and that will be another dispensation after that. It will not be a kingdom, it will not be grace. It will be a dispensation of decisions. Either you take the mark, or dispensation of the mark. Either you take the mark of the beast or the mark of God. The mark of beast, you live a long time, but you go to hell. The mark of God, you live for a short time, but you go to be with him eternally. That will be the next dispensation. And after all these things coming upon us by our actions, in verse 13 it says, in the wicked things and by our great trespasses, for we turn to efface your commandments. And then in the parentheses, it has that you, our God, lightened our lawless deeds and gave to us deliverance. And allied by marriage to the peoples of these lands, you should not be provoked by us unto consumption, for there to not be one left over and preserved. Don't completely wipe us out. Help, Lord, have mercy upon us. And it ends up and it says, O Lord God of Israel, you are just. Oh, thank God that he is just, but he's also merciful. For we were left being preserved as in this day, going back 50,000. Behold, we all are before you in our trespasses, for there is not a standing before you in this or upon this. A P is not N, so it's upon this. There's not a standing before you upon this. So that is the breach of contract. Now we'll go into chapter 10, next video seminar, and we'll find the remedy in the last chapter of the Book of Ezra, and then we will go into the Book of Nehemiah. Hope you'll join us in chapter 10. God bless.